The first thing my son-in-law did after slapping me was straighten his cuff like he had merely brushed dust from his sleeve. The sound cracked across the dining room, sharp enough to silence 12 people. And for one strange second, I heard nothing except the ticking wall clock and my grandson, Noah's fork, striking his plate. Blood warmed the corner of my mouth. Across the table, my daughter Emily stared at me with both hands gripping a stack of mortgage papers that carried my name beneath a line I had never signed. Derek pointed toward the front door and said, "You don't get to control this family anymore." I waited for Emily to stand, to say something, to look at her husband the way a daughter should look at a man who had just hit her father. Instead, she whispered, "Dad, please don't make this worse." That was when I understood the slap was not the worst thing happening in that room. The papers were. My name was, and by morning, Derek would open an envelope he believed contained enough money to save him. Before I tell you what was inside, let me take you back to where I made my first mistake, believing generosity could substitute for boundaries. Stay with me, because every signature mattered. My name is Walter Hayes, and at 68 I had spent more than 40 years learning that buildings failed for predictable reasons. Foundations settled, water found weaknesses, cheap materials cracked under pressure. Families, I would discover, were not so different. I had worked as a civil engineer around Columbus, Ohio, supervising schools, hospitals, parking structures, and enough suburban developments to know what corners cost when someone decided nobody would notice. My wife, Margaret, used to say I trusted blueprints more than people because blueprints admitted where the load was carried. She was right, as she usually was. We were married 40 years before pancreatic cancer took her in 11 months. During those final months, I sat beside her hospital bed and listened as she told me things I had spent a lifetime avoiding. I had been dependable, she said, but not always present. I had paid every bill, fixed every leak, funded every opportunity, and still missed too many dinners because I believed providing was the same as loving. After she died, I made a private promise that Emily, our only child, would never doubt that I was there for her. I kept that promise badly. I gave money when I should have asked questions, solved problems before she understood them, and called it devotion because that word hurt less than guilt. Emily was 34 when Margaret died, married to Derek Collins, who had the kind of confidence that looked impressive until you noticed how much of it depended on being admired. When they first met, I liked him. He had started as a carpenter, worked his way into project management, and then launched Collins Renovation Group with 2 trucks, 6 employees, and a rented office near Westerville. He knew how to talk to clients without sounding slick, and unlike some young contractors I had met, he understood schedules, inspections, and the difference between optimism and fraud. At least I thought he did. He and Emily had Noah, who was 9 then, and Lily, who was 5. They lived in a cramped rental with thin walls and a backyard that turned to mud every spring. A year after Margaret's funeral, Emily mentioned a house in Dublin with good schools and a room where she could keep photographs of her mother. She did not ask me for money. That mattered to me. I offered anyway. I gave her $110,000 for the down payment on a $460,000 house, documenting it as a gift to her alone because my attorney, Susan Mercer, insisted on clear language. Derek hugged me so hard my glasses shifted and said, "Walter, you're giving us a future." At the time, I believed gratitude was stronger than entitlement. I did not yet understand how quickly one could become the other. The first business loan came 8 months later. Derek had landed contracts to renovate 3 medical offices, but needed cash for materials before the first payment cycle. His bank would not extend sufficient credit because his company was young, so I agreed to guarantee a $180,000 revolving line secured against my commercial warehouse in Hilliard. The warehouse was no palace, just a brick building with 4 leased units that Margaret and I had bought years earlier as retirement income. The agreement was narrow, 18 months. Business expenses only. No changes without my written approval. Susan reviewed every page. Derek signed across from me and said, "I'll never put you in a bad position." For a while, He did exactly what he promised. He sent monthly reports, paid interest on time, hired more workers, and even took me to lunch after completing his largest project. Then the reports became shorter. The lunches stopped. Whenever I asked about cash flow, he blamed lumber prices, delayed clients, or a permit office that moved too slowly. None of those explanations sounded impossible, and that was the problem. Bad stories are easy to reject. Plausible ones can carry a man far past the point where he should have looked closer. The week before my birthday dinner, Noah called while I was cleaning the gutters at my house in Worthington. He was 12 by then, old enough to notice tension but young enough to assume adults wanted the truth. "Grandpa," he said, "why is Dad mad about your signature?" I climbed down the ladder and asked what he meant. He said he had heard Derek and Emily arguing in the kitchen. Derek kept saying they needed me to sign before the bank changed its mind, and Emily said I would ask too many questions. Then Derek told her. He already gave us permission once. I asked Noah whether he had seen papers. He said no, only a blue folder his father put in the bottom drawer of the desk. I told him not to worry and not to listen at doors, though I knew that was unfair advice for a child living in a house where everyone else was hiding things. That evening I called Emily. She laughed too quickly and said Derek was probably talking about a vendor contract. When I asked why my signature would be involved, she paused, then said, "Dad, please don't turn everything into an audit." The sentence stung because it sounded rehearsed. Still, I let it pass. My birthday was 4 days away, and I told myself I would ask Derek face to face. The dinner began like a family trying very hard to look normal. Emily had roasted chicken because Margaret used to make it on birthdays. Lily taped hand-drawn paper flowers to the dining room wall. Noah gave me a model bridge kit he had bought with his allowance. Derek's mother, Patricia, arrived carrying a bakery cake and spent 10 minutes praising the new hardwood floors, which Derek had installed through his company. 2 of Emily's cousins came with their spouses. There were balloons, candles, photographs, and all the small rituals people use to convince themselves love is still functioning. Derek poured me bourbon, called me the toughest old engineer in Ohio, and raised a toast to the man who had always supported the family. I remember the wording because of how carefully he emphasized always. After dessert, he placed a blue folder beside Emily and said there was one minor business matter to handle while everyone was together. Emily's shoulders tightened. I saw it before she reached for the folder. Inside were refinance documents for their house, along with an additional collateral agreement listing my warehouse by parcel number. My name appeared twice, once as guarantor, once beneath a signature line. I had not approved either role. I looked at Derek and asked, "Why is my property in your mortgage package?" His smile remained, but the warmth vanished. He said the bank wanted temporary additional security while his company completed a major project. He called it a technical extension of our original arrangement. I told him our original agreement covered the business line, not his house, and certainly not a refinance I had never reviewed. Emily said it would only last 6 months. That was the first moment I knew she had seen the papers before dinner. I asked her whether she had already signed. Derek answered for her. "We're trying to protect the family." "Walter?" I turned the documents toward the overhead light and found a reference to a power of attorney. The language stated that an authorized representative could execute collateral modifications on my behalf. I had given Emily a limited power of attorney the previous year when I underwent knee surgery, allowing her to pay medical bills and communicate with insurance if complications left me temporarily unable to do so. It had expired after 60 days. It never gave anyone permission to pledge real estate. I asked Derek where he obtained the document. He leaned back and said, "You gave it to your daughter." I replied, "That is not an answer." Around the table, silverware stopped moving. Patricia stared at her plate. Noah watched his father with the frightened concentration of a child learning something he could not unlearn. Derek shifted from persuasion to accusation so smoothly, I realized he had prepared both. He said I had spent years making Emily feel that every gift came with invisible strings. He said I enjoyed being needed and panicked whenever someone acted without my approval. Some of it was cruel, and some of it was true. That made it harder to dismiss. I told him my flaws did not create his right to use my property. He raised his voice and said the company employed 14 people, supported 14 families, and would fail if I refused to cooperate. I asked why a successful company required secret collateral. He said I did not understand modern business. I reminded him that I had reviewed construction contracts before he owned his first hammer. Emily whispered his name, but not to stop him. She said it as a warning that he was revealing too much. I looked at her and asked, "How long have you known?" Her face drained of color. Derek stood. "Enough," he said. I remained seated and placed one finger on the signature line. "Did you submit anything using my name?" I asked. He came around the table. His face was close enough for me to smell bourbon and mint. "You don't get to control this family anymore," he said, and then he slapped me. I could have hit him back. I had 5 inches and 30 pounds on him, even at my age. And anger can make an old man forget what his joints have been trying to explain. But Margaret had once told me that the most expensive decisions are usually made in the first 10 seconds after humiliation. So I sat still. I touched the blood at my lip, looked at it on my thumb, and then looked at Emily. She did not move toward me. Her eyes went from Derek to the children to the papers, measuring disaster the way some people measure weather, hoping it might pass if nobody named it. Then she said, "Dad, please don't make this worse." I stood slowly and buttoned my jacket. "I didn't," I told her. He did. Derek's confidence returned because he mistook restraint for surrender. He said we could discuss everything in the morning after I had calmed down. I picked up the blue folder. He grabbed it before I could close my hand around it. That small movement mattered almost as much as the slap. A man protecting legitimate paperwork does not snatch it away like contraband. I left without cake, without gifts, and without letting Noah see me look back. At home, I washed the blood from my face and sat in Margaret's old chair with the lights off. For nearly an hour, I did nothing. I was not being strategic. I was ashamed. The slap replayed in my mind. But Emily's words hurt more. "Please don't make this worse." I had heard variations of that sentence from clients who discovered structural defects, from managers hiding cost overruns, from contractors asking inspectors to ignore one missing brace. It always meant the same thing. The damage existed already, but the person who identified it was being blamed for creating the crisis. At 11:30, I called Susan Mercer. She had handled my contracts for 26 years and my estate since Margaret's death. I told her about the refinance papers, the power of attorney, and the slap. She asked whether I was safe. Then she asked whether Derek still had access to the business line. I said yes. "Not by morning," she replied. We reviewed the loan documents over a secure portal. The guarantee allowed me to revoke authorization for future advances if I suspected misuse, though existing obligations would remain. Susan drafted notices to the bank, Derek, and the company's accountant. I signed them electronically at 114 a.m. The process took 43 minutes. The decision had taken less than one. I arrived at Derek's office at 8 the next morning, carrying a plain cream envelope. His receptionist had not yet removed her coat. Through the glass wall, I saw Derek pacing beside his desk with a phone pressed to his ear. He noticed me, ended the call, and opened the door himself. There was no apology. Instead, his eyes went directly to the envelope. "Emily said you'd come around," he said. I did not correct him. He invited me inside and closed the door. The office smelled of coffee, drywall dust, and the expensive leather chairs he had bought after his second profitable year. He motioned for me to sit, but I remained standing. "I know last night got out of hand," he said. We both said things. I reminded him I had not struck anyone. He exhaled through his nose and glanced again at the envelope. "Fine. I was wrong. But we can't let one bad moment destroy everything we built." He held out his hand. He believed I was carrying either a check or signed consent. I gave him the envelope. He smiled before opening it. The smile disappeared on the second page. The first document suspended all new draws from the $180,000 credit line secured by my warehouse. The second demanded a complete accounting of every transaction involving my name, property, signature, or guarantee. The third confirmed my appointment with Susan and requested preservation of all electronic records. The final sheet contained one sentence in my handwriting. The slap did not change my decision. It changed what I decided to inspect. Derek read that line twice. His skin went pale beneath the office lights. "Payroll is Friday," he said. His voice no longer carried anger. Only calculation. I told him the employees' wages were his responsibility. He said freezing the line would destroy the company and cost innocent people their jobs. I asked how much remained available. He did not answer. I asked whether he had submitted a power of attorney to the bank. Again, silence. Then he said, "Emily knew what we were doing. It was not a defense. It was a threat." He wanted me to understand that exposing him might expose my daughter too. I left before he could ask what I planned next. The truth was, I did not yet know. I only knew I had finally stopped funding whatever they were hiding. That afternoon, I opened the old email account connected to my warehouse leases. I had not checked it in weeks, because statements usually arrived by mail. Buried beneath automated maintenance notices was a message from 4 months earlier, confirming that the mailing address for the property's financial correspondence had been changed. The new address was a private mailbox near Derek's office. I called the bank's commercial services department, verified my identity, and told the representative I had never requested the change. She placed me on hold, returned with a different tone, and said the request had been submitted with supporting authorization. I asked what authorization, a notarized power of attorney. She said. My chest tightened. I explained that the only such document I had signed was limited, expired, and issued to Emily during my knee surgery. The representative asked me to wait while she reviewed the scanned file. Minutes passed. I could hear keyboard clicks through the phone. Finally, she returned and said the document in their system appeared broader than the one I described. I asked who had delivered it. She hesitated, then said, "Mr. Hayes, according to the intake record. The person who submitted the copy was not your daughter." I gripped the edge of my desk. "Who was it?" she answered quietly. "Your son-in-law, Derek Collins." Derek called 11 times before noon. The first 3 calls went unanswered. On the 4th, he left a message saying he wanted to apologize. On the 6th, he said I was jeopardizing 14 families. By the 9th, he had decided I was punishing him because I could not tolerate being challenged. His voice changed with each message, but the purpose remained the same. He wanted me reacting instead of thinking. I turned off the ringer and drove to Susan's office downtown with the bank's email confirmation printed in a folder beside me. The bruise on my cheek had darkened overnight, and the receptionist noticed it before she noticed the documents. Susan did not comment until her office door was closed. Then she looked directly at me and said, "Before we discuss fraud, tell me whether you intend to protect Derek from the consequences." I told her I intended to protect Emily and the children. She replied, "That is not the same thing, Walter, and you need to decide whether you understand the difference." I did not answer immediately because, for most of my life, I had treated those 2 goals as identical. Susan placed my original power of attorney beside the copy the bank had received. The first page matched. My name, address, the notary stamp, even the slight curve in my signature were identical. The second page was different. My original document gave Emily authority to communicate with doctors, insurers, and utility providers during a 60-day recovery period after knee surgery. The bank's copy added language authorizing her representative to modify collateral, manage commercial property, and execute financial instruments. This was assembled from 2 documents. Susan said, "The signature page is real. The authority page is not." I asked whether that meant Derek would be arrested. She shook her head. "It means we preserve evidence. We do not make accusations we cannot yet prove. He may claim Emily gave him the file. He may claim the bank misunderstood. He may claim you verbally expanded the authority." I told her I had done no such thing. "I believe you," she said. "A judge will want more than belief." She requested the bank's complete intake record, access logs, and security footage, if any still existed. Then she warned me not to confront Emily until we understood what she knew. That advice lasted until 3:15. When Emily appeared at my front door, carrying a casserole dish Margaret had given her years ago, she wore hospital scrubs beneath a winter coat and looked as if she had not slept. For a moment, neither of us mentioned Derek, the slap, or the altered papers. She stepped inside and placed the dish on my kitchen counter. "I made chicken and rice," she said. "You probably haven't eaten." I asked whether feeding me was easier than telling me the truth. Her face tightened. She said she had come to make peace. I replied that peace without facts was only delay. She looked at the bruise and whispered, "He feels terrible." I asked why he had not said that in any message without attaching a demand. Emily crossed her arms and said the company could miss payroll because I had frozen the line. 14 people have mortgages," she said. "Some of them have kids." I told her Derek knew that before he used my property. She flinched at the word used. "Dad, it wasn't like that." I pointed toward the dining table. "Then sit down and tell me what it was like." Emily said the company had been under pressure for months. Clients were delaying payments. Material costs had risen, and a large renovation project had stalled. Derek believed one more extension would give him time to finish 2 contracts and repay everything. I asked whether she knew my warehouse had been listed as additional collateral. She admitted she had seen the address but thought it was merely part of the old guarantee. I asked whether she knew he had submitted a power of attorney. "Not exactly," she said. The phrase struck me harder than a denial would have. I asked what "not exactly" meant. She rubbed her forehead and said Derek had asked for the old file because the bank needed proof that she could communicate on my behalf. I reminded her the authority had expired. She said she knew that now. I asked whether she had given him the document. She stared at the table. I gave him access to the folder. She said. That answer placed the first solid crack through the image I had been protecting. Derek may have altered the paperwork. But Emily had opened the cabinet. When I asked why she had not called me, she became defensive. She said every financial conversation with me turned into a lecture. She said I treated Derek like an employee under review, and her like a teenager who could not make a decision without permission. I wanted to reject every word, but memory supplied examples faster than pride could bury them. I had questioned the price of their house, criticized Derek's truck lease, and once threatened to cancel a family vacation when Emily refused to reduce her work hours after Lily became ill. I had called it concern. From her side, it may have felt like control. You think because you paid for things, you get a vote in everything, she said. I answered. When my name and property are on the documents, I do get a vote. She looked away. I asked whether she had signed the refinance papers. She said she had signed some preliminary forms but not the final package. I asked whether Derek had ever used my electronic signature. I don't know, she said. It was the first answer I believed. Though not because it reassured me. Emily asked me to reopen the credit line for 30 days. She said they could sell one of Derek's trucks, collect 2 overdue invoices, and stabilize the business. I asked how much money remained available. She did not know. I asked how much the company owed. She did not know that either. Then you are asking me to risk my warehouse on numbers you have never seen, I said. She replied, I'm asking you to trust me. I told her trust was not a substitute for accounting. Her eyes filled, but she refused to cry. Mom would have helped us, she said. That was the sentence designed to reach beneath reason. For a second, it worked. Margaret had always softened my hardest edges, and Emily knew how often I wondered whether I had become colder without her. I stood and opened the front door. Your mother would have asked why you were hiding papers from me, I said. Emily left the casserole untouched. Before stepping outside, she turned and said, You are going to destroy my family just to prove you were right. I answered, No, I am trying to find out what your family already did. The story Derek told other people began spreading before the bank produced a single record. One of Emily's cousins called to say families sometimes had ugly arguments and I should not let pride ruin my grandchildren's lives. A former colleague of mine, whose kitchen Derek had renovated, left a voicemail asking whether I had become confused about the loan arrangement. Even Patricia called. She said Derek regretted losing his temper. But I had humiliated him in his own home. A man can only take so much disrespect, she said. I asked whether that principle applied to fathers being struck at their birthday dinner. She went silent, then returned to the company's employees. Nobody discussed the altered document. Nobody asked why Derek needed my signature. The slap had become useful to him because it turned a financial question into a family quarrel. If I protested loudly, I would look vindictive. If I forgave him quickly, the paperwork would disappear beneath reconciliation. I had spent decades watching contractors cover defects with fresh paint. Derek was doing the same thing socially, and too many people preferred the clean surface. 2 days later, the bank sent transaction records from the business line. Of the original $180,000, less than $9,000 remained available. The balance had not risen and fallen with normal project cycles. It had moved steadily downward through repeated draws, several of them authorized within hours of deposits from clients. Susan and I reviewed payments to suppliers, payroll processors, fuel cards, and equipment companies. Most appeared ordinary. Then we found 3 vendors I did not recognize: Buckeye Site Services, Northridge Materials, and Franklin Project Consulting. Over 8 months, they had received a combined $72,000. Their invoices described demolition labor, specialty lumber, and project management. The amounts were always just under thresholds that would have required additional bank review. Structuring, Susan said, tapping the page. Maybe innocent, maybe deliberate. I searched the vendor addresses. All 3 used the same private mailbox center on Cleveland Avenue. The suite numbers differed, but the street address was identical. When I called the listed phone numbers, one rang without answer, one had been disconnected, and one led to a generic voicemail that did not name a company. I drove to Derek's largest active project the next morning, a converted office building near Grandview Heights. According to the accounting reports, that site had consumed nearly $40,000 in additional labor and materials over 6 weeks. The parking lot was empty except for a rusted pickup and a portable toilet leaning slightly toward a chain-link fence. No machinery ran. No workers moved behind the plastic-covered windows. A red stop work notice was taped beside the entrance. I was reading it when a voice behind me said, "Mr. Hayes." The man approaching wore a faded work jacket and moved with the stiff gait of someone whose knees had spent years on concrete. I recognized Carl Benson, a foreman Derek had hired early in the company's growth. Carl looked toward the road before speaking. He said the site had been shut down after a worker named Luis Ortega fell from temporary scaffolding and shattered his pelvis. I asked when. 7 weeks ago, he said. That was before Derek claimed delays had begun. Carl added that the safety rails had been removed to move drywall and never reinstalled. I asked why I had heard nothing about the accident. Carl said Derek told everyone the company's insurer was handling it. Then the workers learned the policy did not cover the subcontracting arrangement used on that floor. Luis had been hired through a labor broker, and the broker's coverage had lapsed. His family had retained an attorney. Derek had asked employees not to discuss the accident because publicity could cost them pending contracts. Carl had quit after Derek demanded that he sign a statement claiming Luis ignored safety instructions. Did he? I asked. Carl shook his head. Luis complained about the rails that morning. He looked at my bruised face but did not ask what happened. Instead, he said, Derek wasn't always like this. He used to shut a site down over one loose ladder. Then the money got tight, and every delay became somebody else's fault. That distinction mattered. It did not excuse what Derek had done, but it explained the direction of his decline. He was not a criminal mastermind. He was a frightened man making progressively worse choices while telling himself the next payment would repair the last lie. Carl gave me the name of the labor broker and copies of 2 text messages Derek had sent the crew after the accident. One instructed them to direct all questions to management. The other said missing timesheets would be reconstructed later. Susan told me the messages did not prove misuse of my credit line, but they established a hidden liability large enough to explain the desperation. She contacted the accountant listed on the loan records. He refused to release company books without Derek's authorization, then called back 20 minutes later to say he was terminating Collins Renovation Group as a client. That is either conscience or self-preservation. Susan said, We sent a formal preservation notice to his office anyway. That evening, Derek finally left a message without shouting. "Walter, you're digging into things you don't understand," he said. "There was an accident, but it's being handled. If you keep contacting people, you'll create a lawsuit where there doesn't need to be one." The absurdity of that sentence settled something inside me. He did not fear that I would discover chaos. He feared that I would document it. Noah came to my house the following Saturday while Emily worked a hospital shift. Derek believed he was spending the afternoon with a friend, and I did not like that the boy had lied. Even for me. He stood in my entryway holding his backpack against his chest and asked whether I was still angry at his mother. I told him adults could love each other and still be angry. Though I was not sure I believed it in that moment. He reached into the backpack and removed a small black flash drive. "Dad hid this after Mom asked about your papers," he said. I asked where he found it. Noah said Derek had placed it in the bottom drawer of his desk, the same place as the blue folder, but later moved it beneath a stack of old tax receipts. I took it because he said everything would be fine once you couldn't stop them. Noah whispered. I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. I told him he should never take things from his parents and that I would not ask him to do it again. Then I put the drive on the table and asked exactly what he had heard. Noah said his parents had been arguing after the birthday dinner. Emily kept saying, "You told me he would agree." And Derek answered, "He won't have a choice for long." Noah did not understand what that meant. Neither did I. Not fully. I called Susan before touching the drive. She instructed me not to open it on my home computer, so I carried it to her office, where a digital forensics consultant created an image of the contents. Most folders required passwords. One file did not. It was a draft letter, addressed to the bank, written in Emily's name, stating that Derek was authorized to communicate about family property and financial restructuring. The document had been created 2 months earlier. At the bottom was an electronic signature that looked like Emily's. I read the letter 3 times. Susan said it still did not prove Emily understood the scope of what Derek planned, but it proves she was involved before the dinner. I said. Susan did not disagree. For the first time, the betrayal stopped being something my son-in-law had done around my daughter. It had passed through her hands. The consultant worked through the afternoon and recovered a spreadsheet from a partially deleted folder. Its title was Hayes Asset Summary. The first columns listed my home, warehouse, investment accounts, pension income, and approximate market values. Some figures were outdated, but most were close enough that they had to come from family conversations or documents Emily had seen. Beside each asset were additional headings: current control, transfer method, liquidity, tax exposure. Then came 3 columns that made Susan lean closer to the screen. They were labeled transfer, liquidate, and after incapacity. The warehouse row contained a note about using the existing guarantee to establish broader authority. My home row referred to an evaluation and temporary management. The last line of the sheet contained a comment in abbreviated form: medical evaluation scheduled. E. Will handle conversation. I stared at the letter E until the rest of the room seemed to lose focus. Susan asked whether Emily had recently discussed my health. I remembered her questions about my blood pressure, my forgotten keys, and the afternoon I called Lily by Margaret's name. I told myself those moments meant nothing. Every man my age misplaces a name or walks into a room and forgets why. But the spreadsheet did not need me to be impaired. It only needed someone willing to describe ordinary age as evidence. Susan searched public court records and found no guardianship filing yet. That should have relieved me. It did not. A plan written down can be more frightening than an action already taken, because it still contains possibilities. I asked who created the spreadsheet. The consultant examined the metadata and said the original file had been created on a laptop registered to Emily's email account, then modified repeatedly from Derek's office network. The earliest version was almost a year old. The columns concerning incapacity had been added later. Susan turned toward me and said, "Walter, we need to assume they may try to challenge your ability to manage your affairs." I looked again at my daughter's initial in the final note. The slap had been meant to silence me for one night. This plan had been designed to silence me permanently. Once I understood that someone had been preparing to call me incompetent, Every ordinary mistake from the previous year began to look like evidence. Emily had asked whether I still drove at night. She had offered to organize my prescriptions after I forgot one blood pressure refill. At Thanksgiving, when I misplaced my reading glasses, Derek joked that I would soon need labels on every drawer. I had laughed with everyone else. Now, I wondered how many of those moments had been written down, repeated, or reshaped. Susan warned me not to let fear turn coincidence into proof. "We know a spreadsheet exists," she said. "We know Derek modified it. We do not yet know whether Emily agreed to an incapacity plan." I wanted that distinction to matter. I wanted to believe my daughter had gathered information for some innocent reason and that Derek alone had corrupted it. But the original file belonged to her laptop, and the note said she would handle the conversation. By noon, Susan located the geriatric clinic referenced in the spreadsheet. An appointment had been scheduled in my name for the following Thursday. The listed reason was not routine aging. It was progressive confusion and financially unsafe decision-making. I called Emily from Susan's conference room and asked her to meet me alone. She said she was working. I told her I knew about the medical evaluation. Silence followed, long enough that I could hear hospital announcements through her phone. Then she asked where I had found that information. Not what appointment, not why I was upset, where I had found it. I said, "My house. 6 o'clock. Come without Derek." She arrived 20 minutes late in plain clothes, carrying no casserole and no prepared expression. Her eyes went immediately to the folder on my coffee table. I had printed the spreadsheet, the clinic confirmation, and the draft bank letter. She remained standing while I asked whether she believed I was losing my mind. "No," she said. I asked why she had scheduled an evaluation claiming I made unsafe financial decisions. She said it had not been submitted that way when she called. I slid the confirmation toward her. She read it without touching the paper. "Derek handled the final intake," she said. I asked whether Derek had also created the original asset spreadsheet on her computer. Her mouth opened, then closed. The room became so quiet I could hear the furnace shift behind the wall. Emily sat across from me and admitted she had created the first version almost a year earlier. After Margaret died, I had met with Susan to revise my estate plan. I remembered mentioning at dinner that I might leave part of my estate to a technical scholarship fund because I did not want money damaging the family. To me, it had been an unfinished thought. To Emily, it sounded like a warning that I might disinherit her and the children. She began listing my property, accounts, insurance, and estimated values so she could understand what might happen. I was scared, she said. "You were grieving, and every time I disagreed with you, you reminded me how much you had done for us." I told her fear did not explain the transfer columns. She said those had not been in her original file. Derek found the spreadsheet after she asked him whether they should discuss an inheritance plan with me. He added notes about liquidity, control, and incapacity. At first, he presented it as preparation in case I became ill. He said families lose everything when nobody plans. She whispered, "It sounded responsible." I replied, "Responsible people do not prepare to use a dead power of attorney." She began crying then, but not loudly. Emily had always cried like Margaret, with her shoulders rigid and tears appearing as if against her will. She admitted signing letters that allowed Derek to speak with the bank. She knew he wanted to use my existing guarantee to restructure debt, but he told her the authority was temporary and that I would eventually agree because the alternative was their bankruptcy. I asked whether she knew my signature page had been attached to a broader document. She said no. I asked whether she knew he planned to challenge my capacity. She hesitated. He said an evaluation would protect everyone. She answered. He said if you refused to cooperate because you were depressed or confused, we might need proof that decisions were being made rationally. I felt something inside me settle. Not break. Breaking is sudden. This was heavier. My daughter had not set out to steal from me, but she had allowed the possibility that my judgment could be declared defective if it interfered with her security. She had not believed I was incompetent. She had only become willing to let others say it. I asked why she had not told me about the accident at Derek's project. Her eyes rose sharply. That confirmed she knew. She said Luis Ortega's fall had terrified Derek. The company's insurance carrier disputed coverage because the labor broker had misclassified workers. Luis required surgeries, rehabilitation, and long-term care. His attorney had demanded more than the company could pay. Derek became convinced that if word spread, clients would cancel contracts and the bank would call its loans. He stopped sleeping. He checked balances at 2 in the morning and accused employees of disloyalty. Emily said she watched the man she married become someone who treated every question as an attack. Then why stay silent, I asked. She looked toward a framed photograph of Noah and Lily on my shelf. Because every time I thought about leaving or exposing him, I pictured the kids losing the house, their school, their father, everything at once. I told her they were already losing their father, one lie at a time. She pressed her hands together and said Derek believed I owed them help because my money came from decades of family sacrifice. He says you built your security while Mom raised me. She said that was not entirely false, which was why Derek had been able to weaponize it. I walked to the window and looked at the maple tree Margaret planted when Emily started kindergarten. Its branches were bare, dark lines against a pale Ohio sky. For years, I had told myself I gave money freely, but generosity had sometimes been my way of keeping influence without admitting I wanted it. When Emily bought a car I thought was impractical, I reminded her who had paid her nursing tuition. When she returned to work after Lily's pneumonia, I threatened to stop funding family vacations because I believed she should stay home longer. I had never struck her, forged her name, or tried to seize her property. But I had trained our family to treat money as an argument that never ended. Derek had taken that system and pushed it into fraud. Emily had learned that access to my help depended on keeping me pleased. My guilt did not erase their actions, but it explained why secrecy had seemed easier than honesty. I helped create the conditions, I said. Emily looked up, hopeful that I was forgiving her. I continued, but I did not create the choices you made inside them. Her hope disappeared, and that hurt me more than I expected. I placed 2 documents in front of her. One was a written statement prepared by Susan, asking Emily to disclose every file, conversation, signature, an account involving my assets. The other was a simple letter confirming that she did not believe I lacked mental capacity. I told her she had 24 hours to decide whether to cooperate. She asked what would happen to Derek if she signed. I said I did not know. She asked whether I would report him to the police. I said that would depend on the evidence and his next actions. You're asking me to choose between my husband and my father, she said. I answered, no. I'm asking you to choose between truth and the lie both of you built around me. She said it was not that simple. I told her it had stopped being simple the moment my property was used without permission. Before leaving, she touched the unsigned declaration with one finger. He is not evil, she said. He is scared, I replied. Scared men can still ruin lives. She left both documents on the table. Through the window, I watched her sit in her car for 10 minutes before driving away. The next morning, I met Susan at the bank to revise every authorization connected to my accounts and properties. We transferred administrative access to a new trust structure and named an independent fiduciary as successor trustee rather than Emily. The educational funds for Noah and Lily would remain intact, but neither parent could borrow against them, redirect them, or use them for household debt. Susan asked whether I was certain. Removing Emily as successor trustee felt like writing down that I no longer trusted my only child. I signed anyway. We also prepared a conditional strategy for Derek. I would call him and offer to discuss one final restructuring plan. To qualify, he would have to provide complete books, identify all related vendors, disclose the accident claim, and sign a personal certification that no information had been withheld. He will never agree if he thinks you suspect fraud, Susan said. So I would give him what desperate men often mistake for weakness, apparent surrender. I would tell him the children mattered more than my pride. That sentence was true. I simply would not tell him that protecting them no longer meant protecting him. I called Derek that afternoon. He answered before the first ring finished. I said I had spoken with Emily and understood the pressure created by the accident. He immediately claimed the worker had violated safety rules, then stopped himself and asked what Emily had told me. I said enough to know the company could collapse. He waited for anger. I gave him fatigue. I don't want Noah and Lily to lose their home, I said. And I don't want 14 workers punished for your mistakes. He objected to the word mistakes, but his voice softened when I mentioned a restructuring. I told him I might consider moving the warehouse into a limited liability company and using controlled proceeds to resolve immediate debts. In return, I needed transparent books and written assurances. He said he could prepare everything. No lawyers turning this into a war, he added. I told him Susan would attend because I no longer signed anything without counsel. He resisted, then agreed. Before hanging up, he said, I knew once you calmed down, you'd remember, we're family. The confidence in his voice told me the bait had landed. Emily did not contact me before her deadline. At 6 the next evening, I placed the unsigned declaration in Susan's file and tried not to imagine what Derek had said to her. At 9:30, Noah sent a message asking whether I was sick. I called him and asked why. He said his father told Patricia that I might need someone to take care of my money because I was becoming confused. I assured him I was healthy and told him not to argue with adults. After we hung up, I checked my online investment account and found my password rejected. A security notice stated that access had been temporarily restricted because of a reported concern regarding account holder capacity. Susan contacted the brokerage's emergency line. Someone had submitted copies of the medical appointment, the altered power of attorney, and a sworn statement from a family member alleging that I was liquidating assets impulsively. The brokerage had not transferred control, but it had frozen outgoing transactions pending review. Our attempt to appear calm had given Derek time to move first. By morning, Susan located the filing in Franklin County Probate Court. Derek had petitioned for the appointment of an emergency guardian and conservator, alleging that I had become paranoid after Margaret's death, made erratic financial decisions, threatened the stability of multiple households, and could no longer distinguish legitimate business agreements from exploitation. Attached to the petition were selected messages from Emily. In one, she wrote that I was not thinking clearly since Mom died. In another, she said she feared I might sell the warehouse out of anger. The messages were real, though stripped of context. The petition also included a declaration bearing Emily's electronic signature. Susan read it twice and said, if she signed this knowingly, our position becomes harder. I called Emily. She answered crying and said she had never agreed to file in court. She had signed an earlier family statement Derek claimed was for the bank. I asked whether she had read it. She said only the first page. That answer had become the anthem of our disaster. She had not read, had not asked, had not known exactly, but had still signed. The court scheduled an emergency capacity evaluation before the initial hearing. I spent 2 hours with a geriatric psychiatrist who asked me to remember words, draw a clock, explain hypothetical risks, describe my finances, and discuss Margaret's death. I understood why the questions existed. Yet everyone felt like Derek standing behind the doctor's chair. When asked whether I believed family members were trying to take my property, I nearly laughed. The truthful answer sounded like paranoia, because the situation itself was outrageous. I provided documents and answered calmly. The doctor said his report would be submitted within several days. Until then, certain major transfers would remain restricted. Susan assured me that a temporary petition did not mean Derek had won, but tenants at the warehouse had already received notices from Derek's lawyer warning them that management authority was disputed. One called to ask whether future rent checks should be withheld. Another said his company might relocate rather than risk an invalid lease. My reputation, built over 4 decades, had begun to loosen because of allegations that required only hours to make and weeks to disprove. I returned home just before sunset and noticed the rear security light was on. A white service van stood in the driveway, and a man wearing a property protection jacket was replacing the back door lock. I told him to stop. He showed me a work order authorized by Derek and a copy of the guardianship petition stamped by the court clerk. The petition itself granted no possession rights, but the technician had been told the property needed to be secured against removal of assets. I walked to the front door. My key no longer worked there either. Through the glass, Derek appeared in my hallway holding a binder. He opened the door only 6 inches. "This is temporary," he said, "until the judge decides. We have to make sure you don't destroy records or move money." I asked who gave him permission to enter. He said Emily's declaration established a family emergency. Behind him, I saw boxes removed from my office and stacked near the stairs. My own files had become evidence inside my own home. Then Emily stepped into view. She stood several feet behind Derek with both arms wrapped around herself. Her face was swollen from crying. I waited for her to tell him to open the door, to hand me a key, to say the declaration was false. She did none of those things. "Dad," she said, "please go with Susan tonight. We can fix this at the hearing." There it was again. The same instinct that had governed the birthday dinner comply now. Correct the harm later. Preserve the appearance of peace while someone else seized the advantage. Derek watched me carefully, perhaps hoping I would shout, force the door, or provide the scene his petition described. I stepped back instead. "Do you believe I am incompetent?" I asked Emily. She shook her head. "Then say it in front of him." Her lips parted, but no words came. Derek closed the door. The new deadbolt turned from inside with a clean mechanical click, and I understood that my daughter's silence was no longer passive. It was the lock he had used. I did not pound on the door, call the police, or give Derek the scene he wanted. I stood on my own porch while the evening wind moved through the bare maple branches and listened to the deadbolt settle into place. Then I called Susan. She arrived 27 minutes later with a locksmith, a photographer, and a printed copy of the court docket showing that no order had granted Derek possession of my home. By then, he had already left through the garage with Emily. The locksmith restored my access, but Susan advised me not to stay. Derek had removed files, copied records, and created enough confusion that any argument over missing documents could be twisted against me. I packed 2 shirts, medication, Margaret's photograph, and the old model bridge Noah had given me. For the next several nights, I moved into the small apartment above my warehouse office. It had 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and windows overlooking loading bays. But it was mine. That mattered. As I lay awake beneath the hum of rooftop heaters, I realized Derek expected humiliation to make me impulsive. Instead, it had finally stripped away the last part of me that still hoped this could be solved privately. The psychiatrist's report arrived 2 days later. It found no evidence of dementia, psychosis, or impaired financial judgment. My memory scores were normal for my age. My understanding of risk was intact, and my decisions appeared reasoned rather than erratic. Susan called it strong evidence, though she warned it would not automatically end the guardianship petition. Derek could argue that my condition fluctuated or that I presented well during a formal examination. "He does not need to prove you are helpless," she said. "He only needs to create enough uncertainty to keep restrictions in place while he pressures you." That was when I stopped thinking of the petition as a legal claim and began treating it as leverage. Derek needed time more than he needed victory. Every frozen account, disputed lease, and delayed decision increased the chance I would sign something just to restore normal life. So I decided to give him the appearance of progress. I called him and said the evaluation had exhausted me. I told him I was tired of lawyers, accusation, and watching Emily suffer. Then I asked whether his restructuring proposal was still available. He paused before answering, careful not to sound eager. "It is," he said, "but the longer we wait, the fewer options we have." I told Derek I would consider transferring the warehouse into a new limited liability company jointly connected to his business, provided the company's debts were consolidated and the children's home protected. The words tasted wrong, but I delivered them with the weariness he expected. He said I was finally seeing the larger picture. Then he began explaining how control would work. I would contribute the property. He would manage operations. Rental income would secure a new credit facility. The company would settle urgent claims, finish profitable projects, and repay the debt within 3 years. It was an elegant structure if one ignored that he had already lied about liabilities, forged authority, and drained the existing line. I asked for a written proposal, complete books, vendor lists, outstanding claims, and a personal certification that all material facts had been disclosed. Derek resisted the certification. He said lawyers use such language to create traps. I replied that lenders used it to create accountability. Eventually, he agreed. Before ending the call, he said, "You will see this was always about saving what belongs to all of us." I wrote the sentence down. He still believed my property belonged to him morally, even if the law had not yet caught up with his conviction. Emily came to the warehouse apartment the next evening, carrying a cardboard box. She looked smaller than she had a week earlier, as though fear had been consuming her from the inside. Inside the box was Derek's old laptop, 2 external drives, and a folder of printed emails. She said he kept duplicate records at home because he did not trust his accountant. I asked whether she had taken them without permission. "Yes," she said. For once, she did not soften the truth. Derek had discovered she contacted me after the guardianship filing. He accused her of destroying their last chance to survive and threatened to seek full custody if she testified against him. He told her a judge would see her as unstable because she worked irregular hospital shifts and had depended on his income. She had moved Noah and Lily temporarily to Patricia's house, believing their grandmother would protect them from the conflict. Instead, Patricia refused to let Emily take them home unless she promised to stop cooperating with me. "She says I am helping you ruin him," Emily whispered. I wanted to comfort her, but comfort had too often become rescue. I told her we would contact a family law attorney immediately, and she would have to tell that attorney everything, including her own signatures. The laptop contained more than we expected and less than we needed. Many recent folders had been wiped, the accounting software had been reset, and several email archives were corrupted. Still, Susan's consultant recovered a directory linking Buckeye Site Services, Northridge Materials, and Franklin Project Consulting to a man named Trevor Lane, a former project manager who had worked with Derek years earlier. Corporate registrations showed different mailing addresses, but the bank routing details led to accounts opened at the same branch within 3 months. Payments from Collins Renovation Group entered those accounts, then moved through cashier's checks and transfers marked as reimbursements. Some money returned to company payroll. Some paid Derek's personal credit cards. A substantial portion went to a legal escrow account connected to Luis Ortega's injury claim. The pattern confirmed what we had suspected. Derek was moving borrowed funds through related entities to conceal how badly the company was bleeding. Yet the records did not clearly prove he personally controlled those companies. Trevor could claim independence, and the consultant could not recover signed ownership agreements. We had a map of the river, but not the deed to the dam. Susan contacted Carl Benson and asked whether he would provide a sworn statement. At first, he agreed. Then Derek's attorney sent him a letter accusing him of taking confidential project records and warning that the company might pursue damages. Carl stopped returning calls. 2 other employees said they would speak only if subpoenaed. Fear was doing for Derek what loyalty no longer could. Meanwhile, he escalated the public story. He told vendors I had staged a hostile takeover after becoming obsessed with punishing him. He informed the bank that Emily had stolen company property while emotionally distressed. His lawyer filed a notice suggesting Susan had manipulated me into changing my trust. Each allegation required a response, and each response consumed time. One warehouse tenant announced he would not renew his lease until ownership authority was settled. Another withheld rent pending clarification. The building that had supported Margaret and me through retirement was losing value not because its foundation had failed, but because confidence had. I began to understand that Derek's strongest weapon was not forged paper. It was uncertainty, spread carefully among people who did not know whom to believe. Emily met with a family law attorney named Rachel Kim, who advised her to document every threat and request temporary custody arrangements before Patricia or Derek could establish a different routine for the children. Emily resisted. Filing anything felt to her like declaring the marriage over. Rachel asked whether the marriage still existed in any meaningful sense if Derek used the children as leverage. Emily did not answer. Later, she sat with me in the warehouse office while rain struck the metal awning. I kept thinking if I could make everyone calm down, We could go back, she said. I told her going back was not a solution, because back was where the lies had grown. She asked whether I hated her. I said no, but trust was no longer something she could request. It was something she would have to rebuild through actions that cost her something. The next morning, she signed a sworn declaration withdrawing every claim that I lacked capacity. She admitted creating the original asset spreadsheet, giving Derek access to the old power of attorney file, and signing bank letters without reading them fully. She also acknowledged that I had never authorized the use of my warehouse beyond the original credit line. When Derek learned about the declaration, he called Emily while she was in Susan's conference room. She put the phone on speaker. His voice was low, controlled, and more frightening than shouting. He said she had just handed her father a weapon that would destroy their children's future. Emily replied that he had used her signature in court without consent. Derek said she was rewriting history because I had frightened her with lawyers. Then he warned that if she continued, he would release messages showing she had discussed my assets and questioned my judgment long before he did. You started this, he told her. Emily's face collapsed because the statement contained enough truth to wound. She had started the spreadsheet. She had signed letters. She had complained about me. Derek had built his defense around the parts of her guilt she could not deny. She ended the call and said, "Maybe he is right. Maybe I made all of this possible." I told her responsibility was not the same as surrender. "You opened the door," I said. "He chose what to carry through it." She signed the declaration anyway. Derek sent his restructuring proposal 3 days before the scheduled bank meeting. It was 38 pages of polished language, charts, projected revenue, and carefully arranged optimism. The central condition required me to transfer the warehouse into Hayes Collins Property Holdings, an LLC in which I would own 49%, while Derek controlled 51% through his company. The explanation claimed majority management was necessary for efficient lending. Rental income would be pledged to a new $250,000 facility. The proposal listed vendor debt, payroll obligations, equipment leases, and a contingent workplace matter valued at only $25,000. It did not identify Luis Ortega, the disputed insurance coverage, or the demand his attorney had made. Buckeye, Northridge, and Franklin appeared as ordinary, unrelated vendors. At the end was a certification stating all material liabilities had been disclosed. Derek had signed it. Susan stared at the signature and said, "He believes you either cannot prove the omissions or will be too afraid to expose Emily's role." I asked whether the document was enough. "Enough to negotiate," she said. "Not enough to finish him." Our plan depended on Derek repeating those representations before the bank, outside investors, and legal counsel. If he confirmed the proposal under direct questioning, the consequences would extend beyond a private family dispute. Susan arranged for the bank's special assets officer to attend, along with a neutral attorney representing a potential buyer interested in acquiring profitable contracts if the company required restructuring. She also invited. Derek believed the mediator would help settle the accident cheaply once new funding appeared. In reality, the mediator's presence ensured he could not later claim the liability was too uncertain to disclose. We did not reveal the recovered transaction records or Emily's full declaration. The trap was not a hidden recording or theatrical surprise. It was a room where Derek would be asked ordinary questions and given every opportunity to tell the truth. I had learned from engineering failures that structures often revealed themselves under load. Derek had spent weeks claiming he needed control to save everyone. The meeting would give him exactly the pressure required to show what he was willing to conceal. Then he damaged part of the plan. The night before the meeting, Trevor Lane disappeared. His phone was disconnected, his mailbox account closed, and one of the related company bank accounts emptied. Susan suspected Derek had warned him. Without Trevor, proving common control of the 3 vendors would become slower and more complicated. Worse, Collins Renovation Group reported the old laptop stolen, allowing Derek to challenge the authenticity and custody of any recovered files. His attorney sent Susan a demand that all copies be returned and threatened claims against Emily. The digital consultant preserved forensic records, but the fight over admissibility could take months. I felt the old urge to respond immediately, to expose every record, Call every employee and force resolution. Susan stopped me. The meeting is still useful, she said, but we adjust the objective. Do not try to prove every crime in one room. Make him commit to the version he wants everyone to believe. That advice steadied me. Derek's mistake was thinking the purpose of evidence was always immediate victory. Sometimes evidence mattered most after a man had permanently attached himself to a lie. On Monday morning, 6 weeks after my birthday dinner, I dressed in the same charcoal suit I had worn the night Derek slapped me. The bruise had faded, but I could still remember the heat of it. I placed 2 cream envelopes in my briefcase. One contained the restructuring terms Susan had prepared. The other held copies of the first suspension notice, Emily's declaration, the psychiatrist's report, the altered power of attorney, and the bank's intake record. None of those documents was new. Each had been waiting for the right sequence. At the bank, the conference room overlooked downtown Columbus beneath a gray winter sky. Derek arrived with his attorney and wore the confident expression of a man entering a ceremony arranged in his honor. Emily sat beside Rachel at the opposite end, the special assets officer, the mediator. Susan and the buyer's representative took their places. Derek glanced at my briefcase and said, "I'm glad we finally chose family over pride." I answered, "We are here to choose facts over fear." The bank officer asked Derek to summarize the proposal. He spoke smoothly about temporary market pressure, delayed receivables, and a manageable workplace dispute. He described the 3 related vendors as independent subcontractors. He said the existing credit line had been used entirely for legitimate business operations. When asked whether any family member's authority had been misrepresented, he looked directly at me and said no. Susan then placed his written certification in front of him. "Before Mr. Hayes considers transferring property," she said, "we need you to confirm that this statement is complete and accurate." His attorney requested a break. Derek refused, perhaps afraid hesitation would look suspicious. He read the certification aloud, including the lines declaring that all liabilities, related party transactions, claims, and uses of guaranteed funds had been fully disclosed. At the end, he signed again and dated it. The room remained silent. I reached into my briefcase and removed the second cream envelope. Derek watched it with the same hungry certainty he had shown in his office the morning after the slap. I placed the envelope in front of him. "The first time I handed you one of these, I said, you thought it contained money." His eyes narrowed. "Today, you think it contains my warehouse." He glanced toward his attorney, who had finally begun to understand that the meeting was not proceeding as expected. I slid the signed certification closer to Derek. "Before you open it, read the final paragraph one more time." He did. His voice faltered slightly on the words "under penalty of law and material misrepresentation." The bank officer folded his hands. The mediator stopped taking notes. Emily stared at the envelope without blinking. Derek finished and looked at me. For the first time since the birthday dinner, he was not angry or confident. He was uncertain. I pushed the envelope across the table until it touched his fingertips. "Go ahead," I said. "Open what you worked so hard to earn." Derek opened the envelope slowly, perhaps still hoping the papers inside would become what he wanted if he handled them carefully enough. The first page informed him that I would not transfer the warehouse into Hayes Collins Property Holdings. The second offered a limited bridge arrangement to protect employee payroll, but only through an independent administrator with no authority granted to Derek. The third proposed an orderly sale of viable company contracts so workers and customers would not be abandoned. The fourth notified him that Susan had prepared civil claims concerning the altered power of attorney, unauthorized use of my property information, and interference with my warehouse leases. Derek stopped reading. "This is not restructuring," he said. "This is a takeover," I answered. "No. A takeover is what you attempted with my home, my warehouse, and my legal capacity." His attorney reached for the documents, but Derek held them tightly. The bank officer asked whether the proposal required any new capital from me. Susan said only a restricted payroll facility, funded after verified timesheets and controlled by the bank, with repayment priority from collected receivables. Derek stared at me as if the insult were not losing my money, but discovering I could help everyone without restoring his control. Susan began with the power of attorney. She placed my original document beside the version submitted to the bank and asked Derek whether he had delivered the broader copy. He glanced at his attorney, who told him he was not required to answer. The bank officer intervened. "You just certified that no authority was misrepresented," she said. "This question concerns that certification." Derek claimed Emily had provided the file and told him it was valid. Emily's chair moved slightly as she straightened. Susan displayed the bank's intake record showing Derek had personally submitted the document and requested that all future property correspondence be redirected to a mailbox near his office. She then presented the email confirming the address change. Derek said the mailing change was administrative and intended to prevent delays. I asked why he had never told me. He answered that I was difficult to reach during my recovery. Susan noted the change occurred nearly 8 months after my surgery and long after the limited authority expired. The explanation did not collapse dramatically. It simply lost one supporting beam at a time, until everyone in the room could see that nothing underneath it had been sound. Next came the asset spreadsheet. Susan displayed the original metadata showing Emily had created a basic inventory, then later versions modified from Derek's office network. Emily admitted her role without minimizing it. "I made the first list because I was afraid my father might change his estate plan," she said. "I gave Derek access to the file. I also signed letters I did not read carefully." "That was wrong." Derek looked at her with open disbelief. "You are letting him turn you against your own family," he said. Emily's voice shook, but she continued. "You added the transfer columns. You added the incapacity plan. You used my signature in court after telling me the papers were for the bank." Derek accused her of lying to protect herself. Rachel placed Emily's sworn declaration on the table, including copies of the earlier messages and an explanation of their context. No one pretended Emily was innocent. That made her testimony stronger. She was not asking to escape consequences. She was accepting them. Derek, by contrast, continued treating every admission as something only other people should make. The psychiatrist's report came next. It described my memory, reasoning, financial understanding, and emotional state in plain clinical language. The doctor found no impairment preventing me from managing property or making legal decisions. Susan also produced the court docket, showing that the guardianship petition had never granted Derek authority to enter my home or replace my locks. His lawyer argued that Derek acted in good faith during a family emergency. I asked whether good faith included removing boxes from my office. Derek said he was preserving records because I had threatened the company. Susan showed photographs taken the night I regained access. Along with the locksmith's statement and the service work order Derek had signed, the special assets officer asked why he had taken physical records before any judicial order existed. Derek replied that he feared I would destroy them. "Yet your company later reported its own laptop stolen after Emily removed it," Susan said. "So apparently records become sacred or stolen depending on who possesses them." Derek's attorney objected to the remark, but the damage came from the facts, not the phrasing. Derek had portrayed me as irrational, while repeatedly acting beyond any authority he possessed. Then Susan turned to the 3 vendors. She did not claim we had proven every ownership connection. Instead, she presented the payment history, common mailbox location, synchronized account openings, and recovered transfers into payroll, personal credit cards, and the legal escrow tied to Luis Ortega's claim. The mediator asked Derek why a workplace injury described in his proposal as a $25,000 contingent matter had already received payments far exceeding that amount. Derek said those payments represented a confidential effort to support the injured worker while insurance questions were resolved. The mediator replied that the Ortega demand was substantially larger and had been transmitted months earlier. Derek's face tightened. He argued that settlement demands were not actual liabilities. The bank officer pointed to the certification he had just signed, which required disclosure of material claims, not merely final judgments. Derek said his attorney had advised him the matter was uncertain. His attorney immediately clarified that he had not reviewed the certification before Derek signed it. That small act of self-protection changed the atmosphere. For the first time, Derek looked alone. Susan played the recording from my visit to Derek's office after the birthday dinner. His voice filled the conference room. "We just need you to sign the papers again so everything is clean." Then my voice asked what needed to be cleaned. Derek answered, "The bank does not care about the technical history if the final authority is correct." The recording was not a confession to every act, but beside the altered document and address change, it carried a different weight. Derek accused me of secretly recording a private conversation. Susan explained that Ohio law permits recording when one participant consents, and I had been that participant. His attorney told him quietly to stop speaking. He did not. He said I had planned the entire confrontation, including freezing the credit line, turning Emily against him, and forcing him into a misleading certification. I reminded him that I had not written his answers. I had not hidden the accident, created the vendors, filed the guardianship petition, or changed my locks. "The room did not trap you," I said. "It removed the places where you had been hiding." The bank officer suspended further consideration of Derek's restructuring request and invoked the credit agreement's default provisions based on misrepresentation, undisclosed liabilities, and unauthorized collateral activity. Collins Renovation Group would no longer have access to the revolving line. Existing receivables would be placed under supervised collection while the bank reviewed exposure. Derek leaned forward and said the decision would end the company by Friday. I told the officer I was prepared to fund verified payroll for 2 weeks through the independent facility Susan had described, but only if Derek surrendered operational control immediately and allowed an outside restructuring manager to review active projects. The buyer's representative said his firm remained interested in acquiring several contracts and retaining employees, provided customer files and site records were complete. Derek called it theft. One of the most revealing things about control is that the person losing it often mistakes survival without him for destruction. His workers could keep earning. Clients could receive completed projects. Luis Ortega's family could pursue compensation. The only part of the system that could not remain was Derek's authority. Emily told Derek she would not return to their house with the children. He stared at her as if this betrayal exceeded anything discussed about money. She said Rachel would file for temporary custody arrangements and exclusive use of the home until ownership and debts were reviewed. Derek warned that he would expose every message she had sent about me. Emily answered that she had already given those messages to her attorney and to Susan. "I am not hiding what I did anymore," she said. "You cannot control me with something I have admitted." The sentence seemed to strike him physically. His leverage over Emily had depended on her shame. Once she accepted responsibility, his threats lost force. Patricia, who had joined the meeting by video at Rachel's request concerning the children, began defending her son. She said I had always looked down on Derek and had waited for an excuse to take his business. Susan then showed a preliminary filing in which Derek had listed Patricia's condominium as possible family collateral. Patricia stopped speaking. She leaned toward her screen and asked Derek why her address appeared. He said it was only a contingency. I watched her face change as she finally heard the same explanation we had all been given. The meeting ended without handcuffs, shouting officers, or the satisfying drama people imagine justice always requires. Derek left with his attorney after being advised not to contact the bank, employees, or potential buyers except through counsel. The civil claims proceeded, and the altered power of attorney was referred for investigation. Months later, Derek entered a settlement that required him to surrender his ownership interest in the remaining company assets, repay funds traced to personal expenses, and accept restrictions connected to future fiduciary or lending roles. The criminal investigation did not produce a theatrical trial. He eventually pleaded to reduce charges involving falsified financial documentation and received probation, restitution obligation, and community service. Some people said the outcome was too lenient. Others said losing his company, home, marriage, reputation, and access to easy family money was punishment enough. I stopped measuring justice by how completely another man was destroyed. What mattered was that he no longer possessed the tools to continue the harm, and that the people who had depended on him were given a path forward. The independent manager sold 4 profitable renovation contracts to the buyer who had attended the meeting. 11 of the 14 employees kept their jobs, 2 found work elsewhere, and 1 retired. Verified payroll was covered by the restricted facility I funded, then repaid from collected invoices. I did not make a profit, nor did I expect one. Luis Ortega's claim was resolved through a combination of remaining company assets, insurance contributions after litigation, and the sale proceeds. The settlement could not restore his health, but it provided rehabilitation support and protected his family from immediate financial ruin. Carl Benson eventually gave a statement after Derek no longer controlled his employment prospects. Trevor Lane was located in Indiana, and his records confirmed he had opened the vendor companies at Derek's request. Though he kept a portion of the transferred money, the evidence strengthened the case, but by then it did not feel like a surprise. It was simply the final documentation of a pattern we already understood. Every shortcut had required another shortcut. Every hidden liability had produced another lie. The collapse had begun long before the slap. The slap was only the moment the structure became visible. Emily moved with Noah and Lily into a modest rental near their school. She lost the Dublin house after debts and legal claims consumed most of its equity. I could have paid enough to save it. 3 years earlier, I would have done so without hesitation, then quietly resented everyone for needing me. This time, I paid the security deposit on her rental as a documented loan with a repayment schedule she helped create. She returned to full-time nursing and began counseling. The first time she made a payment, she handed me a check at my kitchen table and waited for me to refuse it. I deposited it. That small act was harder for both of us than any large gift had ever been. She was learning that love did not erase responsibility. I was learning that accepting her responsibility was not cruelty. We met weekly, sometimes with a family therapist, sometimes alone. There were conversations in which she defended Derek, conversations in which I blamed her too harshly, and long silences when neither of us knew whether trust could return. Progress did not arrive like forgiveness in a movie. It came as repeated, ordinary honesty. Noah carried guilt for taking the flash drive. I told him adults had placed him in a position no child should have occupied. He asked whether his father was a bad man. I said Derek had done bad things and continued doing them after many chances to stop. I would not ask a 12-year-old to simplify his father into a villain just to make my own pain easier. Lily wanted to know when everyone would have dinner together again. Emily looked at me before answering. I told Lily we would still have dinners, but they might look different. The first one happened 4 months after the bank meeting. Emily brought roasted chicken. Noah brought the model bridge we had finally assembled. Lily taped paper flowers to my wall, just as she had on my birthday. There were empty places at the table, and nobody pretended not to notice them. Yet there was also no blue folder, no secret conversation, and no person measuring affection by how quickly I agreed to sign. It was a smaller family gathering, but for the first time in years, nothing underneath it was hidden. I returned permanently to my house after the court dismissed the guardianship petition. The replacement locks came out, though I left the marks around the back door frame unrepaired. Susan said I was being sentimental about property damage. Perhaps I was. The scars reminded me that legal ownership and practical control are not the same. A man can hold the deed and still lose his home if he allows guilt, fear, or family pressure to decide who enters. I revised my estate plan once more. Noah and Lily's education trusts remained under an independent trustee. Emily would receive a measured inheritance directly, not because I wanted to punish her, but because neither of us needed money to carry the weight of our relationship again. A portion would fund construction safety training for small contractors, including courses on insurance, worker classification, and reporting obligations. Margaret would have approved of that. She always believed regret was useful only when converted into something that might prevent another person's pain. The first cream envelope remains in the bottom drawer of my desk. The second is stored with Susan's case files. I do not keep them as trophies. Derek's face when he opened them once seemed like the ending I wanted. But satisfaction fades faster than consequences. The true turning point came before either envelope, when I sat in Margaret's chair with blood on my lip and chose not to buy peace one more time. For years, I had believed saying no meant withdrawing love. That belief made me generous in ways that looked noble and weak in ways I refused to see. Derek exploited it. Emily depended on it. I hid behind it. The hardest boundary I ever built was not around my warehouse, my accounts, or my front door. It was the boundary between helping someone and allowing that person to use me. A foundation does not hate the weight it refuses to carry. It simply recognizes what would make the whole structure fail. At 68, I finally learned to do the same.